Today we're in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio at Oakwood Cemetery. We're here at the grave of Robert Berdella Sr. Robert was a World War II veteran, but he was buried with a secret. That secret was his son Robert Berdella Jr. His son is a secret for a very good reason, and that is why his grave is unmarked. Welcome to Curious True Crime. Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. grew up in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, which I mentioned earlier. Robert's father died on Christmas, which is so sad. How sad is that? Seriously. And like 6 months later, his mom got married again, which really infuriated Robert. He felt it was a betrayal to his father, which I can totally understand why. That's moving on real quick. And unfortunately, while working at a restaurant, Robert was actually sexually assaulted by one of his co-workers, which I'm sure is partially what fueled his later actions in life, let's say. Robert was really bullied during high school. Well, probably just in school in general, but in high school it was really bad. He ended up moving to Kansas, Missouri to go to an art institute because he really enjoyed art and oddities. However, this wouldn't last very long for Robert because he brought a live chicken, duck, and dog into class and unalived them. So he got expelled pretty quickly because that's not really what you do ever, and especially not at an art school. It doesn't really make sense. But you know, Robert doesn't really make sense at all. So Robert actually decided that he was going to be a chef afterwards because he did cook and eat the chicken and duck. So he tried being a chef for a while, but that also didn't work out for him. So Robert decided that he was going to open a shop of oddities at Westport Flea Market. And this actually was successful for him. He even got on the news. Chris Bryson was a young male sex worker in his 20s, and he ends up meeting Robert at a bus station. And Robert's like, hey, why don't you come home with me and we'll have some fun? And Chris is like, oh, well, like, okay. Like, Chris isn't used to that. He's used to, like, cheap motels and stuff. So he's like, oh, I actually get to go to someone's house. This is new, interesting, fun. So they end up going to Robert's house. They end up probably doing some drugs and some drinking. And then Robert's like, hey, why don't you come upstairs with me? We'll go to my bedroom and have some more fun. And Chris is like, sure, okay. However, they wouldn't make it to the bedroom before Chris was beaten over the head and passed out. Weirdly enough, that is when Berdella actually got out his Polaroid camera and started taking pictures of Chris while he was passed out. This would be very damning evidence in the future for Berdella. He did this with his victims all the time. Unfortunately, during the next 4 days, Chris would just be in absolute heck, and he was beaten with an iron club. He was sodomized repeatedly. He was given electric shock all over his body, including his privates. He was given animal tranquilizers to keep him in and out of consciousness. Berdella even went as far as to show Chris previous victims' photos and told him that if he didn't cooperate, that he was going to feed him to his dogs like the other victims. Now, I don't think there was ever any evidence that he actually did this, but he did threaten it. So Chris was obviously terrified and just agreed with whatever Berdella said. So Chris kept screaming, and Robert did not like this at all. So he injected Drano near Chris's windpipe and told him that if he kept screaming, he was going to make him completely mute. He even went as far as putting chemicals on cotton swabs and putting them in Chris's eyeballs, which is absolutely disgusting and makes me want to throw up. On the day Chris escaped, He was given the TV remote in between his legs, so that way he could watch TV. He was also given a matchbox and a cigarette for his good behavior. Chris would turn down the TV so that way he could hear where Robert was. And Robert actually ends up leaving for a while, and Chris uses this as his opportunity to get the heck out. So he was able to free one of his hands on his own, and then he took the matchbox and burnt the other thing that was holding him there. Then he got up off the bed and decided that he was going to break the window and jump out the second story. This did hurt his foot or his ankle, but Chris didn't care. At this point, he was just fully committed to surviving and getting the heck out of there. So he runs to the nearest neighbor's house, knocks on the door, and he's just wearing a dog collar. He's completely naked. And he's like, please help me, please call the police. This guy's crazy, he kidnapped me, and he's torturing me and trying to do things and trying to unalive me, pretty much. So the person doesn't let him into the house, doesn't let Chris into the house, but they do call the police. Chris stays on the doorstep of the neighbor's house and waits for police to arrive. And when they do, he very clearly tells them everything that's happened to him. And it's all very visible on Chris's body, what's been happening to him. So the police believe him, obviously. They can see it all over his body. And all of a sudden, guess who comes home? Robert. And they arrest him immediately. So at this point, detectives have about 20 hours to actually get evidence on Berdella, so that way they can keep him in custody. So they go to the hospital, and Chris positively identifies him from photos. And I think that was enough for them to be like, okay, this is our guy. So they were able to get a warrant for his arrest just for the torture and sodomizing of Chris. The really disturbing thing is Berdella was really active in the youth community. He was part of like these organizations that really centered around young boys. And a lot of his neighbors say that this is how he picked his victims. Things discovered in Robert's home were strange oddities, things that they thought may be linked to Satanism and the occult, like bird feathers and taxidermy and just weird little things like that. So people do think that he was involved in the occult and Satanism, but Robert actually denies this. So we're not sure really what's true there. Other things found in Robert's home were skulls, human skulls, of his victims. So that's a thing. They even found like a freshly dug grave in his basement. But they never found a body. They never found a full body. They only found human skulls and I believe a spine. Because they found a skull in the backyard, in the garden of Berdella, they decided that they were just going to dig up the whole yard. And it took them a while to get the equipment because it was Easter weekend. And reports got out that they were doing this. So there was like a big flock of media and people that came to the house because they wanted to be a part of all of this. Inside the house, in the basement, they sprayed this luminol spray or something like that. And it like detects blood. And there was a ton all over the basement. So they found a lot of that. So because the news got out that Berdella was targeting young men, a lot of people called the police about loved ones that went missing and just to see if they had interacted with Berdella at all, or if they knew they had interacted with Berdella, they wanted to make sure that their loved one was not a victim and or was a victim. While the police were doing all of this, they were really concerned about not finding a body because they never found a body. And because of that, they were like, we're never going to get this guy convicted because for some reason, I guess at that time, unless there was a body, it's really hard to convict them of murder, which I thought was really stupid because they literally found 2 human skulls. One still had hair and skin on it. So I just, how is that not enough evidence for you? I just found that really stupid. And finally, that's when police searched the house and found Berdella's diary. and all of the Polaroid photos of his victims. Now, I'm not going to tell you what's in that diary just yet because that's going to be part 2. So thank you guys so much for watching. Part 2 is going to be up on my new channel, Curious True Crime, which will be linked in the description below. And I really hope to see you guys there. I'm really excited and I can't wait to see you guys. So thanks again, and remember, stay curious.